Welcome to The Hill's Coronavirus Report. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Each day we are interviewing consequential leaders in the battle against the coronavirus. Gulf countries endured COVID-19 before it hit here in the U.S. That meant that the United Arab Emirates was weeks ahead in attempts to prevent a second wave of the virus. The UAE has civil and military forces working to support antiviral measures. The UAE is also supporting nationals and residents abroad while giving humanitarian assistance to other countries to help contain the spread of COVID-19. It has made testing available now to all citizens and residents needing it and has had about 8,000 cases of infection and now 52 deaths. But the other impacts of the coronavirus are how nations deal with one another. How have diplomacy and statecraft changed? Does the world of allies and rivals look different through the COVID lens? Diplomats work hard to be, as in the song in the Broadway play Hamilton, in the room where it happens. And that means a lot of plane trips. Not much of that happening now. So joining me to talk about the state of things in the UAE and how his diplomatic skills are being tested is one of Washington's most high-profile and successful ambassadors, His Excellency Yousef Otaiba, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the United States. Welcome, Ambassador. So glad to have you here today. Well, I'm going to start out with this. How do you get yourself virtually in the room where things happen as a diplomat?
First, let me start by wishing you well and making sure that you and your family are healthy and you stay safe. I hope everybody here gets through this safely. We are going through something that no one's ever experienced before. So it's forcing us to think in different ways. It's forcing us to adapt. And if the question is about diplomacy, just like everyone else, we're trying to figure out how to do diplomacy online, through phone calls, through letters. Diplomacy, unfortunately, will have to keep going. The crises in the area, extremism, terrorism, all the challenges that we've always faced aren't going to stop because of Corona. So we have to adapt and figure out how to do it. Like what we're doing here, if this was normal times, we'd be sitting in a studio in person having this conversation. Instead, we're having it online. We're going to learn how to do things differently as long as this environment persists. So just like we're all learning how to distance teach our kids online, just like we're learning how to shop online, I think we're going to be doing a lot more diplomacy and meetings and gatherings virtually until people feel safe getting on planes and traveling to see each other again.
You know, I used to run into you on Etihad Airways a lot because I was going to Abu Dhabi a lot as well. And we used to talk about Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State and the number of miles that she would fly each year. It was sort of a measuring stick for how active someone is. What do you think the ways in which we're going to measure diplomatic prowess are going to be?
It's going to be awkward because this is new. I mean, we're both old enough to remember that before email, we had to write letters. We had to write faxes. But then email came out when we adapted. In this environment, we know nobody knows how long it'll last. But we're going to continue to get things done. We are facing challenges in the region that were challenges before COVID-19. The crisis in Yemen, situation in Libya, Syria. The economies that were struggling before are now struggling even more because of the economic impact of COVID and lower oil prices. So we're going to find ways to get things done. I think we're just going to have to figure it out as we go along.
The other day I had former Foreign Minister David Miliband, who's now head of the International Rescue Committee, on. We were talking about Yemen, but lots of other kind of war-torn places, and that the COVID crisis can leave a lot of carnage in these places, and that the privileged world is vulnerable from that too. And I'm interested in your lens because you sit in a troubled and complex neighborhood. The UAE has pulled out of the crisis in Yemen somewhat, but how has your lens changed, with Iran, with Yemen, with others in the region, given this crisis?
So there's an opportunity. I think there are some countries who are going to look at the region and at the crisis that they are facing and see an opportunity to try to fix the problem, try to resolve the issue. And there are some crises that is going to allow people to manipulate the situation or hijack the situation and take advantage of it. I don't think the pandemic is going to force people or countries to change who they are. But whether you see an opportunity to resolve issues and move forward or to create more problems, that ultimately depends on who you are in your true nature.
Do you think there's an opportunity that's palpable that's real with Iran?
I don't know. I think the jury's still out, and I think it's still too early to tell. I don't know if Corona changes the dynamics and the mindsets of the decision makers there. I think we'll still see. The question I'm trying to understand is whether it's Corona or climate change or any of these big global challenges that we both know are not capable of being resolved by any one or two or three countries. These are going to require the entire world coming together with a collective response, whether it's this pandemic or the next pandemic or climate change and environment. Does this situation create the ability or the opportunity for us to work together as an international community? Are we going to be better prepared to pool our resources and research and development, for example, and work together? Are we going to be able to work across borders better on resolving climate change? And this is kind of the big issue I'm trying to get my head around. It's still
Mm.
early. I don't know which way whether we turn right or we turn left, but I really think this gives you the opportunity to think about what kind of world we want to live in. I just don't see us being able to resolve any of these big problems if everyone works on their own. Now, I get it. It's important to make sure that you've put the fire out in your house before you put out the fire in your neighbor's house. I get that. But I think at some point, we need to look at what kind of world we want to live in post corona and pre next pandemic.
One of the things I've been looking at was how the UAE, which is about, I don't know, 10 million residents and citizens together, and how you've responded to the COVID crisis. And now you've got about 1 million of those 10 million who have been tested. As we said, you've had about 8,000 cases and a regrettable 52 number of deaths. But the level of testing that you deployed per head in your country is somewhat staggering, what you were able to achieve. And I've read other things that you've already developing, smart helmets that the police will have that can detect people's temperatures from afar. And I just want to ask you, do you have the equivalent of a Tony Fauci in the UAE and a Peter Navarro? I mean, how have you been able to achieve so much for a relatively small country in such a short period of time?
Well, we're lucky. We're lucky for a couple of reasons that have nothing to do with, just, decision making. We are a small enough country that we can make decisions quickly and move quickly. So our decision making process, whether it's on the security side or on the economic side, or in this case, a combination of both the economic and the healthcare, they get together, they decide based on facts, what is the best way to go. Do we go this way? Do we go that way? On the testing, we were just very lucky in that we happen to have a system in place where we manufacture our own tests. So we are, as you correctly pointed out, we have tested up to 10% of our population as of today. Our target is to get up to 20%. That's 2 million people out of the 10 million people. That is not easy. It's really not easy. It requires a whole of government approach. I saw pictures of a briefing that was given to our leadership. And if you looked at the way the room was set up, there are people from the healthcare ministry, from transportation, from security, basically the entire government, all working together to achieve a common goal. Now, that helps when you have the right people in the right positions. It also helps when you design a system that works pragmatically, efficiently, and works together as a team. That is something that we have focused on for a very, very long time in the UAE. But at the end of the day, because we're only 10 million people, it is manageable.
I know a lot of governors and mayors that would love to maybe do a deal for the tests that you have if you have surplus. That said, one of the things that we saw in Singapore would look like an early success story, but now they are struggling with a kind of spike up in cases. And one of the ways that you see these cases coming up in Singapore is that some of their own migrant workers, their own guest workers, became new hubs of an increase in the virus. And I'm interested in whether or not there are sensibilities or even sensitivities about that in the UAE, because you've got a couple of million citizens and you have a huge expat guest worker population. Are you putting forward the same practices for guest workers and those that are non-citizens in the UAE as you are for the citizens? How are you bridging that? Because everyone's a health risk.
The rules apply to everyone. I was in a position about a week ago where a member of my family was flying back and they had to quarantine just like everyone else coming in.
Hmm.
The answer I got was there are no exceptions. This is a healthcare policy. This is a risk to anyone. The the virus does not, distinguish between an Emirati or a non-Emirati. Mission is completely um, equal. I mean, this is the first time in I've ever seen there is no immunity. There's doesn't matter if you're from Africa, Asia, Europe, or the United States. It doesn't matter if you live in the north or the south. It doesn't matter if you are religious or non-religious. It
Mm.
doesn't ethnicity or religion is irrelevant here. So I think our folks understand this and the rules apply to everyone. One of the things we've managed to do early on is flights were closed very early on, schools were closed very early on, public gathering places like malls and beaches and so on were closed very early on. So we're doing our best to make sure we create an environment where transmission is minimal. Once we get the numbers down to certain trajectories and curves, I think we'll start thinking about what parts of the economy to turn on. But as everyone here is struggling, governors and the administration, finding the right intersection between healthcare and human risk with turning back on the economy and getting people back to work, it's a very challenging question. And you really need to do everything you can to get that decision right. So we are struggling with that just like everyone else. We
And
want
any lessons learned yet? Because I was intrigued. I looked in that Etihad Airways, for instance, is figuring out a way to do COVID-19 tests in real time for the passengers on the plane. I don't know what we're doing with United and American and Delta, but that was a fascinating thing to hear. I was reading that malls are beginning to find pathways to reopen in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And I'm wondering, what are some of the best practices, if you know them, that are being applied to begin thinking about how you bring your own economy back?
Well, I think whether it's an airplane or a mall or a school, the most important thing you want to do is you want to make people feel safe. So I read an article yesterday that now Emirates and Etihad are flying only repatriation flights. So if they are trying to bring back Emiratis, country X or country Y, or taking expats from the UAE back to their home countries, everyone before they get on that plane is now getting a test, and the result of the test comes out before they board the plane. Even when commercial flights start again, I suspect that this will be now part of the new procedure. I think if I am flying back to the UAE, I will get tested before I go on a plane, make sure I cannot get on that plane unless I test negative.
Hmm.
I think that's going to be the new normal. I suspect you might see something similar in malls where people get their temperature taken. And so I think we are trying to figure out what that formula looks like from A to B. But the most important thing anywhere in the world, whether it's here in this embassy or back home, people have to feel safe. People have to feel that they're not at risk, whether they're coming into the office or whether they're going on an airplane or a mall.
In our last minute or so, Yousef, I want to ask you about something you and I have talked about many times, which is about Arab youth and what Arab youth want in their future. And to kind of cut to the quick, Arab youth want better schools. They want to have science. They want to have faith, but faith dictating less what they do and what their choices are. And that when you look at it, a lot of them want what we have, and you and I have talked to a lot of Arab youth around the United States that were here, and I'm just sort of interested in, take your ambassador hat off for a minute, and put your youthful hat, that hat on of these young people, and ask, how does this time, this era hit that? Are they better prepared? Are they more resilient? How does their worldview change, if you will, by what's happening now?
Again, I'm going to go back to my previous answer is they have to feel safe. They have to feel, whether they are living in the UAE or Egypt or Jordan, they have to feel that their government and their leadership is doing everything they can to protect them, to communicate to them, to make sure that their lives are better tomorrow than it was yesterday. And I think I know that in the UAE that's the case because the numbers and the polls that we've both read tell that. But I think if you had confidence in your government before this and your government is doing a good job, you are going to be even more confident in your government after Corona. But if you had doubts prior to this, your doubts are probably also going to increase. So I think this is a stress test for government, how they react and how they respond. And And the ultimate goal is obviously to deal with and you know handle the healthcare policy and side effects of the corona pandemic, but also your people have to feel that your government is doing the best job that they can to protect them. And ultimately, that's really the core issue between any government and any society.
Well, Ambassador El Otaiba, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the region, but also how this has affected your own diplomatic prowess. So good to be with you. And I want to thank you all for joining me for today's update. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.